Disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon, but looking further west, there is a change on the way. A weather front wrapped around an area of low pressure will bring fresher, wetter and windier weather as we head into the weekend. So showery weather, particularly across northwestern areas, a little bit drier and brighter across the south and east.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could become the next big Great British Giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GB News.
Amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla, Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 9 o'clock. This is Patrick Christys tonight with me, Mark Dolan. I'm with you tonight and tomorrow.
The community is working very closely together in response to what was a local child protection incident. Violent attacks from thugs on the streets.
Can you spot the difference? Politicians and police are accused of a two-tiered response to disorder on our streets. Next, I'll explain why, although the riots in Southport were an absolute disgrace, Britain's multicultural experiment is in crisis, and it must be tackled before the country is lost altogether. Also tonight, we called it This Time Last Year. Suspect woke commentators, who can always be relied upon to pick the wrong side of any argument, seem to be rallying behind the beleaguered star. Yes, as Huw Edwards pleads guilty to child abuse images charges, I'll be tackling this shocking scandal at 10 o'clock. I'll be calling out the BBC's poor handling of serious allegations against one of their biggest stars and the lovey TV establishment, who circled the wagons to protect him. Plus, just 2 months ago, Sir Keir Starmer was condemning the Tories over winter fuel payments.
Last year, the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners.
Well, now he's axed them. So have Labour thrown pensioners under the bus. Reform MP Lee Anderson weighs in on that. And Labour's big tax lie. That's live in the studio this hour. Plus, not satisfied with offending 2.6 billion Christians, the most woke Olympics ever strike again. With biological males, grown men, facing female competitors in the boxing ring. I'll be joined by a top female boxer who fears that at some point a woman could die. I'll also deliver tomorrow's front pages hot off the press with my panel of top pundits. This evening, director of the popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood, businessman and activist Adam Brooks, and best-selling author and broadcaster Rebecca Reed. Oh, and find out why this picture has sparked controversy. A busy 2 hours. Let's get to work. Let me be crystal clear. Public anger about Britain's parallel societies must be addressed. Britain's multicultural experiment is in crisis and has got to be tackled before the country is lost altogether. That's next.
The top story from the GB newsroom tonight. In London, protesters have thrown flares, beer cans and glass bottles at the gates of Downing Street during a protest after the Southport knife attack and riot. Let's take you live to the scenes in Whitehall, where police in riot gear have tried to maintain some semblance of order on the streets of London in the last few minutes. More protesters have been detained outside the Cenotaph. We've also seen officers wrestling protesters to the ground and leading them away in handcuffs after they confronted lines of riot police. The police tonight putting strict controls on where that protest can take place, and anybody coming outside those strict protocols being arrested and being taken away. The crowds, though, chanting phrases such as "Save our kids" and "Stop the boats" in central London tonight. And we've also seen protesters attempt to kick down fences. The Metropolitan Police Force had placed those strict conditions on the protest, and it was meant to have ended half an hour ago, keeping tabs on what's happening in London for you tonight, right here on GB News. And let's reflect also what's happening in Southport, where officers have called in support tonight from neighbouring forces after last night's riots outside a mosque in the town. Disorder broke out following speculation about the 17-year-old knife suspect that killed 3 little girls who were at a holiday dance class in Southport. They were 6, 7 and 9 years old whilst attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop on Monday, and grief turned to anger in Southport as those protests and those riots erupted. Must be said, though, the community came together this morning, sweeping up outside that mosque and rebuilding walls as the community attempted some level of calm in their neighbourhood. Now, in other news tonight, the BBC has admitted they knew about the arrest of the former newsreader Huw Edwards 5 months before he resigned in April. But the corporation said it would have sacked him if he'd been charged while being a member of staff. Earlier, the Metropolitan Police confirmed the man who sent the former presenter indecent images of children was a convicted paedophile. Mr. Edwards had 41 of the most serious type of photographs in his WhatsApp messages of children being abused as young as 7 years old. Let's bring you up to date with events in the Middle East now, where both the Foreign and Defence Secretaries have left on a visit amid reports from the New York Times tonight suggesting Iran's leader Ali Khamenei has ordered a direct strike on Israel. Iran's promise to punish Israel is in retaliation for what it said was the assassination of Hamas's top leader in Tehran. Israel hasn't commented on that, but the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed he will not give in to voices calling for an end to the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, he's also praised his military for its strike on the Lebanese capital of Beirut last night, which killed a senior Hezbollah commander. Slightly better news reaching us from Paris this evening. Team GB have landed 2 more golds at the Paris Games, both coming as well in a dramatic fashion. Alex Yee says he had no concerns about the swimming in the River Seine as he picked up gold in the men's triathlon, while the women's quadruple sculls rowers pipped the Netherlands to the post just on the finish line to secure the gold. Their sensational comeback, putting Britain 4th in the medal table. That's the news from the GB Newsroom tonight. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Remember the good old days when the slogan "Britain isn't working" just related to unemployment? It's now 2024 and it seems a wider breakdown in our society is playing out before our eyes. Social services try to remove children from an address in Leeds, presumably because they faced danger. But what ensued was a riot involving hundreds of people, with locals setting fire to a bus as hapless cops watched on, seemingly powerless to do anything about it. Perhaps they didn't want to inflame community tensions. The last thing you want is to be accused of racism as someone flips over a police car. Police officers are violently attacked in Manchester Airport. Sympathy goes straight to the thugs. We've had those weekly so-called peace marches that feature calls for the wiping out of Israel and intifada, which means suicide bombers on buses, trains and in shopping centres. Stop and search to find weapons seems very sensible, but that has been cut back due to political correctness. Shoplifting, burglary and even sexual assault have essentially been decriminalised if you look at the disastrously low rates of convictions. You've got MPs facing death threats for voting the wrong way in the House of Commons. You've got people being murdered for their Rolex and having their mobile phone snatched out of their hands by motorbike thieves as they walk down the street. None of this is shocking now. It's just modern Britain. The police punish the victims, telling us not to go out with our valuables on show or to reveal our phone in the street. A uniformed soldier gets stabbed multiple times near an army barracks in Kent. Barely makes the headline. And on Monday, 3 children slaughtered at a dance class. The violence and disorder that played out in Southport in the aftermath of this tragedy was appalling, and it cannot be justified. But it's important to understand where this anger comes from. There is genuine anger, genuine fear from ordinary people about our divided society and about others living in parallel communities where British values and even the rule of law are not respected. Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birballs-Singh, tweeted the following. She said, "Multiculturalism fails when politicians cross their fingers and hope it works out. This combined with rampant white guilt. This combo results in Southport, an example of multiculturalism failing." She goes on, "Multiculturalism must be managed." And she joins me in the next hour. We are living under mob rule. Who's in charge? Because it's not the police. Compare their response in Southport last night to the chaos in Leeds 2 weeks ago when they did nothing. People are angry at the blatant two-tiered approach from the authorities. Just take a look at the difference in Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's response to Leeds and then Southport.
unacceptable scenes of disorder and criminality that we saw last night. The community is working very closely together in response to what was a local child protection incident. So appalling to now see those same police facing violent attacks from thugs on the streets who have no respect for a grieving community. It's a total disgrace. Frankly, this is a time when everyone should be showing respect for a community and for the police.
The government is failing in its primary role, which is to keep order on the streets. Knife crime is normal, gun crime is normal, and murderous gangs are embedded in every community. Look at this carnage playing out in Southend-on-Sea yesterday for a supposedly happy summer day out. Without a tough zero-tolerance approach to crime and a proper effort at integration, bringing together our communities and enforcing British values, well then without that, this great country risks being turned into a lawless hellhole. The genie is now out of the bottle. I'm not sure it will go back in. And breaking tonight, more trouble on the streets of Britain, this time in the heart of Westminster, as protesters clashed with riot police outside Downing Street. Crowds have been heard chanting "Save our kids" and "Stop the boats" in central London, and we've also seen protesters attempt to kick down fences. The Met Police have placed strict conditions on the "Enough is Enough" protest. Well, I'm joined now by GB News star Martin Daubney, who was at the protest and ended up in handcuffs. Take a look.
I'm doing my job. Seriously, I'm a journalist at GBNews. I work around the country. Conditions have been put in place. I every day, 3 till 6 a.m. You can't. Seriously. What's happening? I'm a journalist at GBNews recording footage. What's the name? I'm Martin Daubney. I'm a journalist at GBNews.
Now, Martin, I know that you prefer handcuffs recreationally, so what happened today?
So I work in Westminster, as you know, for GB News, and on my way home to the Underground is the Cenotaph. So I walked down there and I saw a sizable protest of people that were shouting all the things you just mentioned. We want our country back, enough is enough, save our kids. And as a journalist, I often go down there and film these protests. And I was just stood right by the Cenotaph filming it. And a few bottles were getting thrown. I saw about 4 or 5 arrests. And a female officer came towards me and she slapped her cuff on my right hand and pulled it behind my back. And I've got to say, Mark, they were absolutely fine about it. I explained I was working as a journalist. I work at GB News, and a senior officer came over and said, "Yeah, we know who Martin is." I go to quite a few of these things in my capacity as a journalist, and they quickly uncuffed me. And I carried on filming. So there was a huge frustration on the streets. But I'll say this, Mark, I understand people's frustration, but I wonder if bottling coppers in London is the proportionate reaction to what we're seeing on the streets of Southport, Southend, and the rest of it. So I've got to say there was huge frustration. You can see there that's me just getting cuffed by the copper. She was saying that there's a displacement order around here, you're not allowed to be here. I explained to her I was a journalist, I explained I worked at GB News, and it was over very quickly. I don't know, over-dramatise this, I was just doing my job as a journalist, and they were very fair and very reasonable with me.
OK, do you think, though, there was evidence of two-tier policing in what happened in central London, perhaps compared to what happened in Southport last night? And
well, I've been on lots of these protests. I was at the Cenotaph protest when coppers were putting the baton into the lads there. There's footage again of me restraining one of the fellas there. He was about to get a severe kicking. I pulled him back, and I think I did him a favour. In fact, his daughter messaged me, said, "Thank you, Martin, for saving my father from what could have been a far worse fate." But on the other hand, Mark, I do understand the deep frustration that British people feel with policing, two-tier policing. I've been to the protests for the pro-Palestine mob, and there is definitely a feeling that they stand off and soft-soak them. I went to one of those protests before, again, footage on GB News. I was egged, I was harangued, I was kind of chased away, I had fluid thrown over me, again, in my capacity as a reporter, as a journalist. I would argue that there is a distinct feeling with a lot of justification that we see two-tier police. And tonight, for example, I've got footage of a huge wall of police. There we go. I sent that through earlier, of riot police in the full tackle, you know, kettling, walking people down the street. And we don't see that kind of footage, for example, in Hare Hills. We don't see that when there is a different protest type.
Definitely,
so
and we
all
also
this adds
didn't, to
more
interrupt
to
you,
the feeling.
Yeah, to interrupt you, we didn't see it at those weekly so-called peace marches in which people were waving banners saying Intifada, which means suicide bombs on buses, or from the river to the sea, which means wiping out Israel. Martin, briefly, if you can, this march was based around, this protest was based around sort of the mantra of enough is enough and save our kids. In a line or two, what exactly was the protest about?
The protest was precisely about the incident in Southport, the feeling that there is two-tier police and the feeling that British people aren't being listened to, and all of this spills over. And Mark, they need to start listening sharpish. Yeah. These kind of protests won't go away. And most people there were peaceful. They don't want trouble, but they want to be listened to, and we've got to start listening very, very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to save our kids, you should probably head down to the BBC. My thanks to Martin Daubney, brilliant GB News star, who, of course, is back tomorrow at 3 o'clock, 3 till 6. What a brilliant broadcaster. And it turns out a pretty brave guy who was handcuffed by cops this afternoon, simply passing through a Westminster protest. OK, folks, let's get a reaction now. Is Britain in a crisis of multiculturalism? Let's get the views of the director of the Popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood, businessman, activist and broadcaster Adam Brooks, and journalist and presenter Rebecca Reid. Great to see all three of you with me. My gosh, we're living in fractious and divided times. Rebecca, what are your thoughts about the last 24 hours, the trouble we've seen in Southport and the response from the authorities?
I think the most important thing is that the mother of one of the children who was murdered has asked the people to stop doing this.
Yeah.
And if the mother of the victim says stop and you don't stop, then that's not really why you're doing it. It's not really about those children at this point. And I think it's about a much bigger issue. And I think the thing that I keep thinking whenever I see this, Leeds, now London, all of them, Southport, they are different ethnicities, different religions, but it's all men. And I think if really you're going to start looking at demographics that are causing the problem, it is men at every single one of these. And people are going to be very upset to hear me say that, but that should perhaps clarify why trying to boil down why somebody's behaving a certain way to one aspect of their demographic is unhelpful.
Is it important to understand where the anger comes from and address it rather than call these people far right?
I think far right is a very lazy term. It's like snowflake or millennial or anything else. It doesn't mean, or woke, it doesn't mean very much. And what I would sometimes call far right, somebody else would not call far right. So I think it's a silly phrase that has lost all meaning. But thuggishness is certainly true, criminality is certainly true. Perhaps better to use that than to start using the far right, which is very watered down at this point.
Adam, what does the trouble that we've seen in the last couple of weeks tell us about the state of Britain?
We're in trouble, and it's only going to get worse. I'm telling you, I speak to the average man and woman on the street, and there are women that are very, very angry and that are turning up to protests and are turning up to marches too, because we are being labelled. I get labelled far right. I simply do not want illegal immigration, tons or thousands of unverified, unchecked, unknown men being dumped into our towns and our cities. We don't know their past. We don't know what they're here for, what they're capable of. And we've seen some heinous crimes from asylum seekers or illegals that have come over on these dinghies. And it's only going to get worse. We have had thousands already come across since Keir Starmer has been in power. They are doing nothing, and I do not believe they're going to do anything. So the average man and woman on the street is fearful. I have a hotel near me that houses these asylum seekers. We don't know who's there. Would I let my children play anywhere near that? No, I wouldn't.
Although these recent crimes have been carried out by homegrown Brits, of course.
Can I just ask, how does that... I totally understand where you're coming from, I really do. But I don't understand how that pertains to Southport, because we don't have a name or an ethnicity or a religion for the person who committed this crime.
These three children, and my heart goes out to the parents and to these children that have been stabbed. I can't emphasise that enough. That has been a spark. It has ignited the anger that has been brewing there, because we are not being listened to. We have no say in this country who gets
parallel communities.
But how is that into our communities?
Sure, but how is that?
Certain cultures not integrating, not using the language, and sometimes.
But we don't know who did that. I understand that completely, and I think there are parts of this country where integration is a problem. But this is a really weird, illogical place to put your anger. This is not about that.
No, it's not.
We don't know.
Okay, briefly, Adam, before I come to
My taxes are going towards feeding, housing, giving free healthcare, and God knows what to these illegal immigrants and asylum seekers coming over here. It's got to stop. We've had enough, and if it doesn't stop, you're going to see more riots on the street of Britain, and they can't stop it. The authorities will.
But how is that relevant to Southport?
Rebecca raises a good point, which is what happened in Southport. There's no evidence to demonstrate any link between a migrant and this appalling attack on 3 girls, which has seen them slain.
I wouldn't draw a connection there. I think that what we've got is that Britain, particular cities in Britain, is a tinderbox. And that can blow up through the merest spark. There's not a rational line of argument of person X did this, I'm going to protest about it. And the reason there's a tinderbox is some of the concerns that Adam has highlighted. But I think increasingly a view that the police are not doing their job. We've heard about accusations of 2-tier policing for some time. At the top of the show, Mark, I think you showed we've got a 2-tier Home Secretary.
That's actually, in fairness, if you listen to the whole statement she made, she said other things that was slightly
the rhetoric is complete.
She said she said that they should face the full floor of the law.
I think on the face of it, I can understand why on the face of it, people believe that Leeds and Southport have been handled rather differently. And the important thing to say is in both cases, Mark, completely ineffectively. Last I checked, it will gone up a bit. 4 people have been arrested in Southport. 4. Over 50 police officers have been injured. They're nicking Martin Daubney in Westminster.
He didn't get nicked.
I do think, briefly, Mark, I think there's a contrast, for example, between the so-called peace marches in support of Gaza, in which hateful anti-Jewish slogans were carried on placards, and in fact, one particular slogan was reflected onto the Big Ben Tower.
And nothing was done.
A handful of arrests. I don't remember the heavy-handed approach from the cops. Why? Because they don't want to create trouble or inflame community tensions.
That's not why. There are lots of reasons, but throwing a brick.
What are those reasons?
Throwing a brick in the face of a police officer is not the same as holding up a placard. Now that placard, anti-Semitism is inherently wrong.
I've got to stop there. We're going to
and those people should have been arrested. The police did nothing.
You can see how excised my pundits are. We're coming back to this for the papers at 10:30. But next up, just 2 months ago, Sir Keir Starmer was condemning the Tories over winter fuel payments.
Last year, the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners.
Well, now he's axed them. I'll get reaction from Reform UK MP Lee Anderson live in the studio. But next up, Chancellor Rachel Reeves doesn't think her private school tax raid is that big of a deal.
An obsession with the 7% of children who are in our private schools. I'm more interested in the 93% of children who are in our state schools.
Well, I'll be speaking to a parent who is considering moving abroad for the good of her kids' education. Plus, we'll have a debate from both sides. Sparks will fly. That's next.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
You'll relate to this one. We've all been there, haven't we? Tensions high in the car as you head off on the latest adventure or holiday during the summer break.
Now, with the average family set to spend about 3.5 hours a week together in the car driving on the roads during the holidays, new research has shown that our relationships could be tested to the limit.
Yes, figures show that 21% are having arguments for simple things like the driver going the wrong way, which we were saying is not actually very simple. That's very simple.
I was going to say that. I'm surprised it's just 21%. Yeah. If I was going the wrong way down the road,
you'd know about it.
You'd hear from me.
A further 20% squabbling over how their partner drives, yes, and 25% admitting to being more prone to rowing when their kids are misbehaving. It's a lot to deal with, isn't it?
Fair enough.
Well, we're joined now by dating and relationship coach and author Persia Lawson. Good to see you this morning, Persia. What is it about being in a car that just makes things so tense?
Well, I think it's probably quite obvious, isn't it? It's the fact that we are in a confined space, we can't go anywhere, and it can just really creates so much tension and stress, especially if you and your other half or a family member, whoever you're in the car with, are going through a little bit of a tricky time. And if it's really hot outside, that doesn't help either. So inevitably, it creates a lot of irritation and bickering, I would say, from my experience.
And what is it about children? If you add children into the mix, it just makes things very, very difficult, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Kicking the back seat and just squabbles, kicking the siblings. So adding children into the mix is just going to turn the heat up on that tension.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have Labour thrown pensioners under the bus, and did they lie to get elected? I'll be asking Reform UK MP Lee Anderson live in the studio. But first, does Labour hate aspiration? It's time for the head-to-head. After they ignored the warnings of thousands of parents and many experts that the government finally has admitted that their VAT tax rate on private schools will price some parents out of the sector. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced on Monday that private school fees will be subject to VAT from January next year. And in Treasury documents published moments after Reeves finished her speech, the government admitted these policy changes may lead to increased costs for some parents and carers, and that some pupils may subsequently move into the state educational sector. Well, the Chancellor doubled down when she was grilled about this yesterday.
You do know how many children are in private education, do you, Chancellor?
7% of children are in private
what's
schools,
that
and
number?
93% of children are in
the
our
number of
state
children,
schools.
not percentages. Do you know what the number is?
I haven't got the number to hand, but 93%. There's an obsession with the 7% of children who are in our private schools. I'm more interested in the 93% of children who are in our state schools, in buildings that are often falling down, with unqualified teachers.
So it begs the question, does Labour hate aspiration? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say, or tweet us at gbnews and do vote in the poll. But before that, I'm joined now by a parent of a child at private school, Linda. Linda, thank you so much for joining me. Linda, it's going to be a tough conversation for you. I know it's been a stressful time. What are your current circumstances?
I have 3 children. And 3 of them have been in private school for a very long time. And recently, I became a single mom, and I had to take one of my children out because of special needs. So I have been working with mainstream school for quite some time now. And, you know, I find it quite, it is quite anxious time for me because for my children, it's my choice of putting my children in the private school it's not a luxury, it's a need, because I am a full-time working mom. I work Monday to Friday, and I'm also running my own business. I work in early years sector. So this is quite a demanding job. We do have staffing crisis massively, so which requires me to sometimes work directly with children. So my 3 children, need to be taken care of. And for me, private sector works very well because everything is under one roof. My children get exposure to sports, music, drama, and a good socialization, and safety and security, and the consistency, most of all. It is there for my children.
OK, and of course, by educating your kids privately, you are saving the taxpayer a fortune, just under £10,000 per child it costs to educate a kid in the public sector. Briefly, Linda, what impact do you think this will have on your children if they're taken out of the schools in which they're quite happy at the moment?
It's going to affect their mental health massively, simply because it's a new change, another change, a massive change for my children, because they are going to be in bigger classrooms. The facilities they had before, the exposure they had for sports and, you know, what was driving them to thrive all this time, it's going to be taken away from them, or it's going to be reduced. So this is going to cause a lot more trouble. So which means eventually I will have to close my business and, you know, to take care of my children, because possibly these 3 children, they cannot be in the same school. They will have to be put in 3 schools because all the schools are oversubscribed.
And Linda, let me interrupt you because I've only got a couple of seconds. I just want to ask you finally, briefly again, if you can. I'm sorry, we wish you had longer. But if Sir Keir Starmer is listening to this, what is your message to him about this policy?
I think he needs to focus on the 93% of the state school. It's falling apart. There is a massive staffing issue. There are, you know, hundreds of pages of, you know, expectation for the staff to, you know, to support the children, but there are no resources. The trained staff, most of them are going abroad. Okay. So he needs to focus on, you know, building the mainstream before even considering putting you know, increasing the VAT on the private schools, so that, you know, parents feel secure. People like us who are working parents who pay tax and who also, you know, help the economy. You know, we can continue doing so.
OK, Linda, my heart goes out to you. My best wishes to you and the children. I hope that a solution is able to be found. That's a concerned mother of 3, Linda, there. Well, going head-to-head on this are 2 good friends of mine, former Labour advisor James Matthewson and former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. James, a moving account there from Linda. This policy doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, don't try and loop in Linda's kind of suffering with the policy not making sense, I think, Mark. I think there's 2 separate things here. I think Linda's story is understandable, and I think single parents, I think we should pay credit to them, because my mum was a single mum and raised me as well. I've got a state school, but I understand how challenging that job is. But we must acknowledge here, Linda pointed out at the end of her contribution that the 93% of children in state schools are underfunded, they're under-resourced, and the money for that has to come from somewhere. Now, private schools are businesses. They are due to pay VAT. They've been exempt from paying VAT under these circumstances. It's no longer viable for them to be exempt from that. And the business models of these schools should build that into, they should take that into account. They should build that into their business model.
Just to interrupt you, James, it's deeply wrong, isn't it, to tax education, to tax an organisation in a school that's trying to make and create bright children for the country. Why would you tax that?
Well, all schools are doing the same. The state school sector is doing exactly the same. I understand what Linda's saying, but I mean, unfortunately, all the things that she pointed out that she needs from the private school, she can get from the state school. That provision is there. Therefore, it is the luxury to send your children to private school. It's exactly the same with something like cosmetic surgery. If it's something you do not need, but it is something you elect to do and choose to do, it's a service. And if it's a service, you pay tax on it, because that's how our system works.
Charlie Rowley, if parents can afford an extra £10,000, £15,000, £20,000 a year for school fees, they can afford to pay a little tax on that.
Well, that number will vary, and I think people just have to bear in mind that we're not talking about the parents who are able to send their kids to places like Eton or Winchester or Harrow, who are charging very, very high fees. So people may not have sympathy for people in that kind of income bracket who could potentially pay more. We're talking about the majority of those in the private school sector that don't go to those top-end schools, where you're talking even that Treasury document set out that people, young people, maybe children with special educational needs whose parents pay for private education will now have to, if they can't meet those costs, because I don't think private schools in that particular regard operate really as a business, as Jim was saying. I think they're more like charity statuses because they are providing educational support to kids that need it the most. Those kids will find themselves now in an overinflated state school sector, which will cost even more money for the taxpayer in the long term.
Oh, well, let me tell you, you both look to have been very well educated. It was an enlightening conversation. My thanks to James Matthewson and Charlie Rowley. Who do you agree with? Does Labour hate aspiration? Howie on X says Labour's tax rate on education will just make private education the preserve of the very rich. Labour have priced out the working and middle class. Mike says only for others. When it comes to their own kids, they are all about aspiration. Mick says, seems to me that they don't want kids to be smart anymore. They prefer thick sheep-like people who are much easier to brainwash and control. Future sleeve rollers with no mind of their own, just like the majority of the UK. Oh, sleeve roller, what an expression. I like it. Bit of lyricism there from one of my viewers. Your verdict is in. 93% of you say that Labour do hate aspiration. 7% say they do not. Coming up, not satisfied with offending 2.6 billion Christians, the most woke Olympics ever strike again with biological males facing female competitors in the boxing ring. We'll debate that shortly. Plus, as a Kurdish migrant faces jail for trying to push a stranger in front of a tube train, should we be paying for another foreign criminal in our jails, or should this monster be deported? But next up, just 2 months ago, Sir Keir Starmer was condemning the Tories. He was furious about winter fuel payments.
Last year, the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners.
And now he's axed them. So have Labour thrown pensioners under the bus? Reform UK MP Lee Anderson reacts with me live in the studio next.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon, but looking further west, there is a change on the way. A weather front wrapped around an area of low pressure will bring fresher, wetter and windier weather as we head into the weekend. So showery weather, particularly across northwestern areas, a little bit drier and brighter across the south and east.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The most woke Olympics in history strike again. 2 male boxers smashing up women in the ring. We'll debate that with my top pundits in just a moment. But first, we welcome Reform UK's Chief Whip, Lee Anderson MP. Already, it looks like Labour's election promises may not have been worth the paper that they were written on. Despite promising not to raise taxes on working people, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has now admitted she will raise taxes in the autumn budget.
Look, I think that we will have to increase taxes in the budget. We will have a budget on the 30th of October, and ahead of that budget, we will have a forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility, on this occasion based on accurate numbers.
Are you ruling any of those out now, as we speak?
I'm not going to write a budget or start to write a budget.
There you go. Well, of course, that's a standard line. Lee Anderson, good to see you. Congratulations on your election victory.
Thank you.
I haven't seen you since the 4th of July. And you've got your job now as the unofficial opposition to call out Labour's double standards on tax and, frankly, their misinformation.
Well, it is. Well, it's just a pack of lies. I mean, they've had 14 years, Mark, to get ready for government. They've been banging on for the last 14 years about the austerity, about the taxation system. We've got the highest tax since the Second World War. Listen, 3 weeks after being elected, what have they done? They've took 400 quid off pensioners for the winter fuel allowance. They've reneged on the £300 saving on people's energy bills. They're giving billions away to foreign countries for the green, this lunacy, this net zero journey. They've just told the public a complete pack of lies. And I've had pensioners contacting me this week. They're absolutely furious. And some that's even voted Labour are saying to me they will never vote Labour again. The trust has gone. You know, it's the key. And this Rachel Reeves, she should hang her head in shame and apologise to the British public and resign. It's an absolute disgrace.
However, of course, Labour have inherited a broken economy thanks to the Conservatives. You were a Conservative MP 2 years ago.
I was a Conservative MP, not just 2 years ago, probably about 6 months ago.
Well,
yeah,
exactly.
But like I said before, Mark, they've had 14 years to get ready of this. They had the books. They keep saying they didn't realise how bad the economic situation.
It's not a mess of their making, is it? This is Rishi Sunak's mess, Liz Truss, and your mate Boris Johnson.
But they made promises during the election that they would not raise taxes, they would not stop the winter fuel allowance, and what they've done, hey presto, 3 weeks later...
They said they wouldn't raise VAT, income tax and national insurance.
Listen,
they've stuck to that.
Listen, Mark, you're a clever man, you're an intelligent man, or so I've been told. You know what's coming. They're going to hit the poorest. All they've done in the first 3 weeks of government is attack our pensioners who have put a shift in for the past 50 years. It's an absolute disgrace.
How would Reform UK plug the gap? Because we can agree the country is in the red. You're a great believer in us living within our means.
Well, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd scrap HS2 for a start.
Well, we've done that.
Scrap the... This net zero nonsense, it's costing absolutely billions. Foreign aid, that needs to be looked at.
What would you do with foreign aid?
Me personally,
what figure would
I wouldn't give anything away. Not a single.
And what about
penny.
What about famines and earthquakes?
Look, we're supporting Ukraine. That's costing billions of pounds a year. I think that's enough. We've got an asylum system in this country. The illegal migrants that's crossing the Channel, Mark, it's costing £8 million a day. That's £3 billion a year. I think we're doing our share. We're giving the rest of the world enough money. This nonsense needs to stop. Charity begins at home.
How angry are pensioners going to be about these winter fuel payments? Labour could argue that there are lots of middle-class and wealthy pensioners who won't get the benefit, and arguably that makes sense when the country's broke.
Well, there might be an argument for that, but there is millions of pensioners, Mark, that just over the threshold to get pension credits, probably £2 or £3 over. This is going to hit them hard in the pocket. Yeah. And like I say, you know, for the past 5 years since I've been in Parliament, all the Labour Party has done in the House of Commons is say, how are people going to pay the fuel bills? Pensioners want more money. They keep saying this every single week, and then 3 weeks after being elected, what do? They put the boot into our pensioners and steal £400 a year from them.
Well, I've got this email from a pensioner, Sandy, who said, "Good afternoon, Mark. I'm furious. I've just been told Rachel Reeves will still receive her £3,400 heating allowance as an MP, even though she has taken away hours. This is only just the start. Could this be looked into, please?" Is that true that MPs get a winter heating allowance?
No, I don't get any winter heating allowance.
Well, let's hope that's not true. But how is this going to go down amongst pensioners? They've got a long memory. In 5 years' time, they'll remember this, won't they?
I mean, look back to the 2017 election when Theresa May announced the dementia tax. Yeah. That really backfired on it. Pensioners do not forget. And don't forget, Mark, that pensioners vote. You know, they go out and vote religiously at every single election. They're furious at the moment. You know, people like my parents, you know, £400 to them is a lot of money. It's a lot of money to people in Ashfield who rely on that money to pay their fuel bills. And like I said before, the Labour Party have been consistently asking over the past 4 or 5 years for people to get extra support on their fuel bills because, you know, gas and electric's gone through the roof. And what do? As soon as they get in government, they take £400 off pensions.
They didn't mess up the economy, though, did they?
No. But
they didn't create the deficit and the national debt now over £2 trillion.
It's a fair point.
But that's a Tory debt.
You can't campaign over the past few years to say we need to give people more money and more support on their fuel bills. And then, you know, actually, I think it was West Streeton about 6 weeks ago said they would not cut their winter fuel allowance. Then 3 weeks after being elected, what do? They backtrack. They've lied to the public. They've lied through their teeth, and they've stolen £400 off our pensioners.
Listen, a brilliant debate. Lee, you're looking well. You're on fire. You are the official opposition. More power to you.
More. Thank you, Mark.
My thanks to Lee Anderson, MP. Lots more to come. Are we doing boxing next? This is an extraordinary story. You will not believe this. First of all, Huw Edwards at 10. I'll be reacting to the horrific development in that story as he pleads guilty to looking at images of child abuse. That is at 10. It's a story that I wasn't afraid to talk about a year ago. I got dogs abuse for covering it. Well, I'll have my response at 10. You won't want to miss it. Plus, more disorder on the streets of Britain as protesters throw bricks at police in Hartlepool. But next up, males in the boxing ring against females. Has the world gone mad? We'll debate that next.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
We're joined now by GB News national reporter Charlie Peters, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us.
Well, let's start with the expenditure, shall we? From the last year, it was £89.1 million. That's what the royal household spent. And one of the core parts of that expenditure was, of course, their big event last May, the coronation. £800,000 went into that. And then we should look at the engagements. You mentioned the number that King Charles made last year. Well, £4.2 million on those engagements, much of that travel. And then finally, how much that costs us all? Well, it's £1.29 per person. That's the cost of the monarchy to the taxpayer. But that really hides the truth of how that cash comes about, because all of the money that the royal household spends is actually theirs being given back to them by the Treasury. It comes from the Crown Estate surplus. That's a £16 billion portfolio they have, and their sovereign grant is made up of the surplus from 2 years prior. So in the year to 2022, there was about £350 million knocking around from the surplus. That was given all to the Treasury, and they were given back 15% as their core sovereign grant. Additional 10% was given towards the resurfacing of Buckingham Palace. That's been going on since Parliament voted on it in 2017. It's expected to take 10 years. But all in all, that's been about £86.3 million. And as you heard, the expenditure was £89 million. So how do they mix that gap? How do they close that gap in and cost out? Well, they make their own money as well from additional sources of income. And that was the gates, the receipt to Windsor Castle and their many palaces across the country where people have paid about £10 million to visit in the last year.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'll be dealing with Huw Edwards in no uncertain terms at 10 o'clock. But first, a huge protest has broken out in Hartlepool as demonstrators throw bricks at a line of riot police. Witnesses say a metal beam has been launched at officers during the unrest. Men in balaclavas are said to be hitting the police officers with huge wooden bats. Now, this is a very worrying development. Of course, we've seen disorder in Southport. We saw chaos and disorder in Leeds a couple of weeks ago. We've seen violence at Manchester Airport. Have the police lost control of law and order in this country? Let's get the views of Mark Littlewood, Adam Brooks and Rebecca Reid. Mark, here we go again. What is going on?
Well, I mean, look, as we were just saying earlier in the show about Southport and Leeds, I think there is this undercurrent of discontent and anger, a belief that over a whole series of incidents, the police have not done their job, are not protecting the right people. Rebecca makes the fair point that there isn't a direct logical cause and effect. There isn't a specific thing that people are complaining about. It is anger at the way policing has taken place and a feeling, I think, that we are sort of losing control of the country, that no one's really in charge, that Britain is fraying at the edges, that social breakdown's occurring, and our politicians and authorities don't appear to have much of an answer to it, and to some don't appear to be even-handed, that Indigenous Brits believe they are treated differently to immigrants or ethnic minority communities. Now, whether that's true or false, the fact that people believe it is what matters. It's not just that justice must be done, it's got to be seen to be done.
Is this a crisis of the melting pot society, a crisis of multiculturalism?
100%. And it's... I tell you, look, I'm very angry. I speak about it a lot, about these illegal immigrants, what they get when they come here. We have poor people in this country that are struggling to feed their kids. Yet if you come over here on a dinghy, you get a free bed, you get free housing, you get free food, free healthcare, free travel. You get treated basically like a king. And yet we have got people doing 3 or 4 jobs that are struggling to feed their kids, and they're getting nothing. And I do not trust this government, I didn't trust the last government, or the senior police in this country to protect me and my family or my community. And unfortunately, these poor officers that are on the front line today and yesterday are taking the brunt of anger that is really directed at the hierarchy and the government of this country. And I do not condone that, and I condemn the actions of trying to hurt police officers and setting cars alight. Of course. That is going to get us nowhere, but this is going to get worse, and it's because the anger on the street is boiling up. If I'm angry, if your average man and woman is angry, people that maybe are a little bit extreme are going to be even angrier.
Rebecca Reid, do the public have good cause to be angry?
I think there are lots of reasons to be angry. I think being broke is the thing that makes people angriest. I think not being able to buy small things that make your life happy, and also that constant low-level stress about poverty and about keeping a roof over your head.
What about a sense of injustice to see people entering the country illegally and not sent back?
That, I think, is... It's a difficult one, because I think it's often used to make people angry in a way that they shouldn't necessarily, because there are people in this country who have more than you do.
Well, if it's costing £3 billion a year to accommodate illegal migrants, then maybe they should be angry.
And absolutely, we need to clear the backlog and we need to make our processing faster. But that's not really the main reason people are struggling in this country. It's more about how wealth is structured. And I think certainly this idea that certain people get away with more is absolutely not true. I can tell you as a posh white woman that I get away with more than most people demographically. I never get stopped for anything. So it's not fair to suggest that brown people are somehow being handed free rein to commit crimes. That's absolutely not true.
The question, to my view, cost of living has been a problem, but it is the perception that there isn't even-handedness that really causes outrage.
Right.
We usually have the stiff upper lip, you know, keep calm and carry on, but if we don't think that the system's fair and even-handed, that breeds
But I
anger.
think that is right-wing nutters stirring up trouble on the internet, telling you the reason your life's not fair is because the brown people take things away from you, the police are too mean to you, and people are not smart enough to be... media literacy is so low.
Is it racism? These riots?
No, it's people being sold snake oil. It's people being told the reason you're poor is because someone cheated you.
In Leeds, we see our police force running away. In Southport, we see them with batons and dogs. OK. Two-tier policing, and that is going to cause more problems.
Next up, as he pleads guilty to child abuse image charges, I'll be tackling the Huw Edwards scandal in no uncertain terms. I won't hold back. That's next.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon, but looking further west, there is a change on the way. A weather front wrapped around an area of low pressure will bring fresher, wetter and windier weather as we head into the weekend. So showery weather, particularly across northwestern areas, a little bit drier and brighter across the south and east.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on the chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect And then you throw me into the mix, and trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it is 10 o'clock. This is Patrick Christys tonight with me, Mark Dolan. I'm with you for the next 2 nights. We called it This Time Last Year. Suspect woke commentators, who can always be relied upon to pick the wrong side of any argument, seem to be rallying behind the beleaguered star. As Huw Edwards pleads guilty to looking at images of child abuse, I'll be tackling this shocking scandal in just 2 minutes' time. I'll be calling out the BBC's terrible handling of serious allegations against one of their biggest stars, and the lovey TV establishment who circled the wagons to protect their own. Plus, after a breakdown in law and order over recent weeks, has Britain's multicultural experiment failed? I'll get the views of Britain's strictest head teacher, the fearless and honest Catherine Birbalsingh, who says it's wrong to label everyone who protested in Southport as far right, pointing to ordinary people worried about a lack of integration in our society. It's a conversation that no other channel wants to have, but we'll be doing it later this hour. Plus, shocking footage shows the moment a Kurdish migrant pushes a stranger onto tube tracks. But as he's found guilty of attempted murder, should the taxpayer be footing the bill for another foreign criminal in our prisons? We'll debate that as I deliver tomorrow's front pages with tonight's top pundits this evening. The director of the Popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood, businessman and activist Adam Brooks, and author and broadcaster Rebecca Reed. Oh, and I'll tell you why this picture has caused a bit of uproar. A busy hour to come. Let's get to work. The BBC and woke media lovies who protected Huw Edwards should be ashamed. I'll be dealing with them next.
The news tonight from the GB newsroom is that protesters have thrown flares and bottles at the gates of Downing Street tonight in a demonstration of anger in response to the deaths of 3 little girls in Southport. These are the scenes earlier on tonight in Whitehall, with police in riot gear attempting to contain the protest by imposing strict conditions on marchers. And in the last hour, we've seen further protests bubble up in Hartlepool, where police have had to take to the streets in riot gear. And there also are reports circulating on social media of unrest in North Manchester, where police have deployed helicopter support following protests outside a hotel where the protesters believe asylum seekers are being housed. Well, in London, officers wrestled protesters to the ground and led them away in handcuffs after they confronted lines of riot police shouting, "Stop the boats." Meanwhile, there have been some disturbances in Southport. Officers have called in support from neighbouring forces after last night's riots outside a mosque in the town. Disorder broke out last night following speculation circulating on social media about the 17-year-old knife attack suspect who killed the 3 girls at a local summer holidays dance group on Monday. Today, police were given more time to question him. He remains in police custody. Meanwhile, the England footballer Anthony Gordon has donated £10,000 to the young victims in Southport. The 23-year-old Merseyside-born star has pledged the amount to a GoFundMe account set up by the dance community in response to the tragedy. The three girls, aged 6, 7 and 9, were killed while attending a Taylor Swift-themed workshop on Monday, with the star herself sending condolences and expressing her shock at what happened. That fund has now reached over £300,000. Now, in other news tonight, the BBC admitted they knew about the arrest of the former newsreader, Huw Edwards, 5 months before he resigned in April of this year. But the corporation said today in a statement it would have sacked him if he'd been charged while being a member of staff. Earlier, the Metropolitan Police confirmed the man who sent the former presenter indecent images of children was in fact a convicted paedophile. Mr Edwards had 41 of the most serious type of abuse photographs in his WhatsApp messages, including one of a child as young as 7 years old. Let's bring you up to date now in events in the Middle East, where both the Foreign and Defence Secretaries are on a visit amid reports from the New York Times tonight suggesting Iran's leader Ali Khamenei has ordered a direct strike on the country of Israel. Iran's promise to punish Israel is in retaliation for what it said was the assassination of Hamas's top leader in Tehran. Israel hasn't commented, but the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed he won't give in to voices calling for an end to the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, he has also praised his military for its strike on the Lebanese capital Beirut last night, which killed a Hezbollah commander. Just lastly, Conor McGregor's been banned from the roads for 2 years for dangerous driving. The world-famous fighter was charged with several motoring offences following an incident in Dublin in March 2022. He was also fined and handed a 5-month suspended sentence. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. This time last year, I got dogs abuse for daring to cover the Huw Edwards story and ask important questions about a man who was the face of the BBC and one of the highest paid stars at the corporation. The Sun newspaper's brave public interest investigation discovered that Edwards had paid a vulnerable youngster a huge amount of money for explicit images, with the young person's worried parents saying his life had been ruined. Plus, there were serious allegations of inappropriate behaviour towards BBC colleagues. So call me old-fashioned, but I thought it was worthy of comment. After the shocking news today that Edwards has pleaded guilty to looking at images of child abuse, I'm glad that I stood my ground. I'm glad that I reported the story on this show. Fair play to my team, Liam and the gang, for working on this with me, and the channel itself, GB News, for being so strong on this. Here is an excerpt from my opening monologue on the 13th of July of last year, 2023. Suspect woke commentators, who can always be relied upon to pick the wrong side of any argument, seem to be rallying behind the beleaguered star.
I think it would be a crying shame if this is the last we see of Huw Edwards on television, when the allegations have turned out to be not that much.
But what we're seeing right now is the pompous, woke, Negroni-swilling establishment media elite closing ranks and protecting their own, as they always do. But the alleged victims, 7 and counting, must have a voice too. Well, the selective morality of woke media lovies has come back to haunt them. John Sopel, Emily Maitlis and others who condemned the Sun newspaper for their courageous journalism on the Edwards story, well, they've gone strangely quiet today. This story is, first and foremost, a nightmare for Edwards' victims in those horrific images. But it's also a nightmare for his well-heeled establishment mates who defended him. And it's a nightmare for the BBC, who sat on their hands for far too long as the serious allegations about one of their biggest stars mounted up. The truth is that channels like GB News and papers like The Sun must always be free to speak truth to power and to investigate and call out the behaviour of the rich and famous, many of whom would have you believe that they are such better human beings than you and me. Will you tolerate any more smugness from the BBC now after the behaviour of one of their biggest stars, the man who was the face of the Queen's funeral, the King's coronation and the general election? And a now disgraced man who was paid almost £500,000 last year, including a 40 grand pay rise, whilst not even on air. Your money, by the way. Shame on Huw Edwards, and shame on those around him for seeking to suppress the truth. Now, your reaction to what I've got to say, let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. With me this evening, with ringside seats to all the big stories of the day, the director of the Popular Conservatives, Mark Littlewood, businessman and activist Adam Brooks, and author and journalist Rebecca Reid. Good to see all three of you. Well, Adam, where to start with this story? So many high-profile media elite individuals defended Huw Edwards at the time. I got dog's abuse for covering the story. Thank God I did.
Same. I sat on this settee, and to be fair, I give Huw Edwards hell, rightfully. And
based upon serious allegations that he faced.
Yes, and I was called hateful. I was called on Twitter as a homophobe because of the allegations. And now we learn that he had 41 indecent images of children on his phone, of which he's pleaded guilty to making 3 images. 7 of the images were category A, which is the worst possible child paedophilia images, which include penetration or sexual intercourse with an animal or sadism. Now, this is disgusting. It's indefensible. And it really does turn my stomach that we have a man that was paid £500,000 from our licence fees involved in such a scandal. And I think the BBC have a lot to answer for, and there needs to be an internal investigation.
And Rebecca Reid, the first instinct of woke media lovies was to circle the wagons and protect their own.
I mean, in the tweet that you refer to, when you covered it, you opened the tweet, "We wish Huw Edwards well."
Well, that's because he was allegedly suffering from a mental health crisis. And he had gone into hiding.
So you, like a lot of people, didn't jump to say he is evil, he is bad, because that's not what we did.
I said he had a case to answer. I was told not to cover it at all. Yeah, stay away from it.
For good reason, because we didn't know the full facts, and because it is illegal, and you can completely destroy a case against somebody who has done something evil if you report on it incorrectly. A lot of what people in this... I'm going to say media literacy again for the second time this evening. A lot of people in this country seem to think there's collusion, that the press want to silence things. That is not true. There are very, very strict laws about how you report on things when a case is ongoing.
That's not true.
It is... Sorry,
no,
what part is not true? You cannot make random accusations about somebody on television when they are being investigated.
The former editor of The Sun, David Yellen, gave loving praise to Huw Edwards. He said, "This is Huw Edwards' darkest hour. He'll be back. He's a hero."
But
and
this was when we thought that he had paid a 20-year-old.
He said that
this wasn't when we knew that...
be pursuing the story, and therefore, by definition, GB News.
But we're talking about two different things. When we thought that he had paid a 20-year-old for images, that is gross, but that is not illegal. These details is a different conversation. Nobody was defending somebody having images of child abuse on their phone. Nobody in the media thinks that's acceptable at all.
You might have thought that I appreciate that Emily Maitlis, John Sopel, Lewis Goodall and the rest are friends.
Alan Rossbridger.
Yeah, they're sort of friends of Huw Edwards, or were friends of Huw Edwards, and therefore I guess...
Until about 24 hours ago.
Until about 24 hours ago. So I guess there's a natural instinct to, as you say, circle the wagons. But I'd say 2 things about it. First, without condemning somebody on suspicion or rumour, when the first story broke, I think you've probably got to ask yourself internally, is there likely to be more there than just this? Or is this a complete one-off incident? That didn't seem to cross their minds. And as you say, I've been looking throughout the day, not over the last couple of hours, Mark, have they said anything since?
No, they haven't.
Well, the ones who are employed by the BBC
No, the news
would not be allowed... Yeah, I'm not... I didn't say she was. I said the ones who are...
The most high-profile critics of the Sun's approach to this story, coverage of it, were John Sopel and Emily Maitlis, who have been silent today.
They should have said something today. That's look, if you do get something badly wrong as a journalist, they should come out and say that they did.
But they didn't get something badly wrong. They covered a different story. They are talking about... They are talking about a different story. They were talking about a 20-year-old man. And the boy in question...
By the way, are you dismissing these alleged crimes against a vulnerable youngster?
Are you suggesting that
you're dismissing them?
You're suggesting that I'm dismissing child abuse?
No, you sound like you are underplaying the allegations.
You think I'm underplaying? You think I don't care about child abuse because I care about media law? What a ridiculous, spurious thing to say.
Now, let me be very clear that you talked about the allegations he faced a year ago as unproven and not to do with children. Therefore, you implied that they weren't as serious as what he has admitted to doing today.
The 20-year-old's parents came out and said it was a consensual relationship. That is a different situation. Paying a 20-year-old is different from child abuse.
Sorry, the parents said, of this alleged young person, the parents said it's destroyed that young person's life and that young person was a vulnerable
but that it was
individual.
Consensual, so not illegal. And when this new...
So you see, you are underplaying it.
No, I'm not. They are
different.
A 20-year-old man is different from children.
Oh, that's okay.
Child abuse is completely different.
Sorry, a vulnerable 20-year-old, that's not a problem. The face of BBC News...
That's completely
different. A large sum of money,
when did I say it wasn't a problem? Do you know what? I'm not going to talk about this anymore because you are deliberately misinterpreting what I'm saying. This is so unprofessional. I am being so clear here. I am saying it is not illegal. I did not say it's acceptable. I would never say it was acceptable. I was saying it wasn't illegal.
Let Rebecca finish.
Rebecca's done.
But to the surprise of virtually no one who I think reflected upon this, turns out there's a lot more to the story. Now, we couldn't have known that, but it doesn't strike me as leaping to a completely irrational conclusion. I am wholly unsurprised that there was a whole... I don't know Huw Edwards, but I'm wholly unsurprised that there's a spate of other things that have come out, and he has been pleaded guilty to at least this tranche of them in court today. I'm unsurprised about that. John Sopel, Emily Maitlis, apparently the leading journalists of our times, completely amazed.
And who knew him well?
Who knew him well?
OK, I've got to say one thing. The mental health card that is getting played by Huw Edwards...
Well, we don't know that he's playing a card. He may have mental health issues.
This is so disrespectful to the victims in those photos. Who cares about the mental health of those poor children that were in those images?
And it's what every single sex offender does. They all play that card. It's disgusting.
Right, Rebecca, now, crucially, I accept the distinction you've made, OK? And therefore, I withdraw any suggestion that you've underplayed those serious original allegations, which you consider it serious just like I do. So we agree on that. But do you share my concern that these high-profile media figures, some of the most famous journalists in the country, including Sopel and Maitlis, condemned the Sun newspaper for reporting on the allegations that faced Huw Edwards a year ago?
The person I condemn is Huw Edwards because that is a disgusting thing to do.
Do you not condemn them for attacking a newspaper for doing their job?
I don't think it's the most interesting or important topic here. What Huw Edwards did is unforgivable.
You want to answer the question? You're being like a politician. I need a straight answer. Do you condemn their comments about the Sun's reporting of the allegations against Huw Edwards?
I haven't seen their comments in full, so I wouldn't be able to... Without looking at them written down.
They said that the approach to the Sun, I believe the expression from John Sopel, I can help you, I've got a good memory, is that they should hang their heads in shame.
I would want to see the whole context of the whole comments to be able to comment on them.
I think we can agree that John Sopel and Emily Maitlis have not contributed greatly as journalists to getting to the bottom of this story or to the truth.
OK. That they put their head above the parapet and they look idiots. And one thing I just want the audience to realise is that one of those pictures on Huw Edwards' phone was a kid aged 7 to 9 years of age. That is disgusting, and that is unforgivable.
Yeah, and he should rot in prison for it.
Absolutely, and on that we can agree. A BBC spokesperson has said it was made aware in confidence that Huw Edwards had been arrested on suspicion of serious offences and released on bail whilst the police continued their investigation. At the time, no charges had been brought against Mr Edwards, and the BBC had also been made aware of significant risks to his health. In the end, at the point of charge, he was no longer an employee of the BBC. Coming up, tomorrow's newspaper front pages. A Kurdish migrant who tried to kill a stranger by pushing them in front of a tube. Should he be immediately deported? And next, after a breakdown in law and order over recent weeks, has Britain's multicultural experiment failed? I'll get the views of Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Singh, who says it's wrong to label everyone protesting in Southport as far right, pointing to ordinary people worried about a lack of integration in our society. It's the conversation no other channel wants to have, and we'll be having it next.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Prince Harry also revealed that he wouldn't bring his wife Meghan Markle back to the UK over safety concerns.
Let's talk to royal correspondent Michael Cole.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Ellie. I mean, they live in California. I'm not sure what the murder rate is there, but that's a more dangerous place than Britain's at any time of the day. And of course, he compromised his own safety when he said in his book, Spare, his autobiography, which was Ghost Britain, that he'd personally killed 25 Taliban when he was serving with the British Army in Afghanistan. Well, that painted a target for life on the back of himself and his family, which was a very unwise thing for him to do. The other thing which struck me, it was that he invoked the name of the late Queen, saying that he'd had several conversations with his grandmother, and she'd been very, very supportive in his battle. He sees himself, and it's a word he's used, as a dragon slayer against the popular press, the tabloid press, and he's continuing with that. Of course, his brother, Prince William, has settled, but also in the programme was Huw Grant. Now, Huw Grant also has settled, as indeed did I, when I received an apology from News Group. I believe in a free and unfettered press. Newspapers are having a bad time at the moment, losing circulation, losing advertising. Young people don't read newspapers. And so I felt that the right thing to do was to settle. I didn't want to take punitive action against newspapers.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Tomorrow's papers on the way, but first, Southport. And this town was rocked by violent disorder last night after hundreds of people gathered outside a mosque just hours after a peaceful vigil was held to remember the 3 young girls killed whilst attending a Taylor Swift dance class earlier this week. While many were quick to label everyone protesting as far right, Britain's strictest head teacher, the headmistress of Michaela Community School, Catherine Singh, saw it differently, writing on X, Multiculturalism fails when politicians cross their fingers and hope it works out, combined with rampant white guilt. This combo results in Southport, an example of multiculturalism failing. Multiculturalism, she goes on, must be managed. And I'm delighted to say that Catherine Burble-Singh joins me now. Catherine, what is your view of the commentary around last night's trouble in Southport and the labelling of those protesting as far-right?
Well, of course, there will have been some far-right protesters there and rioters, and all of the violence is shocking, and obviously the targeting of the mosque is awful. The term far-right is often thrown about relatively liberally. I am often called far-right, for instance. I'm now being told that I'm helping the far-right. I'll tell you what helps the far-right. Multiculturalism that fails. And the thing about multiculturalism is that it's difficult to make it succeed. We make it succeed at my school, Michaela, in Wembley, and that's because we handle it very carefully, and we understand the necessity of having an overarching culture that all of the children buy into, and that they will sacrifice things that are that they think are really important for themselves in order to better the whole. And that is what we require from everyone. Now, that when we do that, multiculturalism succeeds. So I'm not somebody who says multiculturalism is always going to fail, but in order for it to succeed, we need to stop this business of just throwing this term far right around, because what it does is it says those people are simply unacceptable. Multiculturalism is great, except for those people. And if we get rid of those people, we'll be fine. And I think that that's problematic, because it's undermining what we all want, which is for us all to get along with each other.
Most definitely. Do those on the political left have a blind spot when it comes to the challenges around multiculturalism?
Yeah, I think some of them do. I think some of them are willing to listen. But to be honest, I think people on the right also have this blind spot. So what I find is when I try and put forward this argument, which is that multiculturalism needs careful looking after, people on the right say, no, multiculturalism is failing, it's awful, there's nothing that can be done about it. And then there's people on the left who say, what are you talking about? Multiculturalism is wonderful. All we need to do is throw everybody into a big pot and just let it go, and everything is lovely. Apart from these very evil people on the far right who are trying to undermine the wonderful experiment that is multiculturalism. And I just think both sides are wrong. I think there's a middle ground, which is that multiculturalism isn't easy, precisely because people are coming with all kinds of different ideas, different religions, different cultures, different ways of doing things. And so we need to find, what do we have in common that we can make sure that we are all valuing and protecting. And then sometimes when those cultures might clash on certain issues, we say, you know what, it's not so important, my thing, I'm going to let it go. So as an example, at Michaela, our school, we have a vegetarian lunch. And the reason for that is that we've got some children who eat meat but no pork, some children who eat meat but no beef. It's quite difficult to make our family lunch work. And so, you know what, we all go vegetarian and then it works. We all sacrifice something for the betterment of the whole.
Catherine, what is your view of current levels of legal and illegal net migration and the impact that that may have on social cohesion?
If people are coming into the country with different cultures and different ways of doing things, the country needs to be able to absorb them at a rate where it doesn't upset the balance of the whole. So that is a problem. But what I always say is the right often concentrates simply on the immigration issue, which is an issue, but it is also the case that our schools are teaching our children, and those children turn into adults. And if those children, whatever color they are, whatever religion they are made to feel somewhat ashamed of being British, perhaps, given the way in which we teach our history curriculum and so on, then the children who become adults are not able to love their country in a way that I think will make us successful. Now, loving your country doesn't mean you cannot be critical of it. I am massively critical of our education system, but I still love Britain. And I think that there's an important distinction there that we need to make, and we need to look at what our schools are doing, not deliberately, but if they are undermining that cohesion, which is so important for a country to succeed, then we need to be asking some questions around that.
Michaela Community School has been very successful because it teaches all of the students to love their country, to tell them that they are British and to be proud of that. So schools can clearly help, especially schools like yours. But are these parallel societies here to stay, do you think, with communities that don't integrate, that don't speak the language, that don't share British values and sometimes that don't follow the rule of law?
Well, it all depends on what we do with our communities. What will our schools do with those children? You know, that's why schools are such an important tool in all of this. Because the fact is, we are where we are. The right tends to say, oh, but immigration. Okay, I'm not arguing with you, but we are where we are. What are we going to do about it? Right? That necessarily involves schools and us talking about this and talking about it in such a way where we're thinking, forward thinking. How are we going to do this now? What are we doing with this? And that I'm afraid, I think both the right and the left are not thinking in a practical way with forward-thinking solutions.
Catherine, a privilege to have you on the show, a very delicate and complex subject. My thanks to the headmistress of Michaela Community School, Catherine Burble-Singh. Lots more to come. The papers are next.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon, but looking further west, there is a change on the way. A weather front wrapped around an area of low pressure will bring fresher, wetter and windier weather as we head into the weekend. So showery weather, particularly across northwestern areas, a little bit drier and brighter across the south and east.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's time now for the press pack. The papers are in. Let's take a look. And we start with the Metro. I'm guilty. Huw Edwards facing jail. Stab girl mum's anger at riot. Outrage. The mother of a 7-year-old killed in the holiday club knife crime rampage called for an end to violence as rioting over the killings left 54 police officers injured. The Sun newspaper, this is very much a story that they have owned for over a year now. Huw Edwards' downfall. Guilty is the headline. Trusted face of the BBC, first exposed by The Sun, admits having pedo video of boy as young as 7. Disgraced Huw Edwards was facing jail tonight after he admitted receiving sex abuse images of children as young as 7 from a paedophile. The ex-News at 10 anchor's downfall triggered yet another crisis at the BBC. We're going to discuss that in a moment. Bosses admitted knowing about his indecent images arrest last November, but still carried on paying his £480,000 taxpayer-funded salary. Edwards, who is 62, pleaded guilty to 3 charges of making indecent images of children, covering 41 videos and pictures. A greater fall of grace you cannot imagine. Daily Mirror with the same story. Edwards' fall from grace. Huw's child abuse pics shame. BBC News star faces jail for images of children as young as 7. We've made a decision on this show, partly thanks to the suggestion of director Faye, that we do not use the expression child pornography. That is not what it is. It's images of a crime, the crime of child abuse. The Independent now. Huw Edwards faces jail over shocking child abuse images. The Guardian. Team GB's day of golden drama. Fears of escalation after Israel kills leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah. Met looks at ex-Murdoch chief over deleted emails. And Edwards could face jail over indecent images of children. The Times now. Huw Edwards pleads guilty to viewing indecent images. Paedophile's phone led police to ex-newsreader. BBC kept star on full pay after learning of arrest. And Nigel Farage denies whipping up street riots in Southport. The Reform UK leader and GB News presenter Nigel Farage insisted today that he was asking very legitimate questions about the Southport attack after he was accused of having whipped up rioters by encouraging false rumours. And last but not least for now, the Eye. BBC in turmoil over presenters' indecent images. Let's get reaction from my outstanding pundits this evening. I'm delighted to have none other than Mark Littlewood from the Popular Conservatives, if that's not a contradiction in terms. I'm only kidding, Mark. We've also got businessman. Oh, well, that's it. Businessman and activist, pub landlord, maybe Britain's most famous pub landlord, Adam Brooks, and the best-selling author and journalist, the one and only Rebecca Reed. Rebecca, can we talk about any potential reputational damage for the BBC? Now, this is the behaviour of an errant employee, but will they suffer any brand damage as a result?
I think yes, because with Jimmy Savile it did brand damage. People, they're forever tainted by it. The interesting question is, when something like this happens, do we want to revisit how we treat people who are accused of crimes, particularly sex crimes? So we had a conversation fairly recently about if an MP is accused of rape, should they then not be able to be an MP? Should they not be able to be on site in Westminster? And the response was, no, that's wrong, false allegations. And I'm interested that lots of people who disagree with that seem to feel that Huw Edwards should not have remained on payroll with the BBC. And I think we need consistency here. I personally think if you are credibly accused of a sex crime, you should be suspended without pay. So Huw Edwards should not have been on the payroll, but that would need to be more consistent across the board, I think.
I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah, there's a
Mark.
I don't disagree wholly with what Rebecca said. There is something of difference with the MPs. You are your boss or your constituents who you're answerable to, not the bureaucratic authorities at Westminster. MPs are in a very peculiar position because of that. But the bit that staggers me here is, look, he was arrested. The BBC knew about that. He was charged. He's now pleaded guilty. The test for the BBC, especially for your golden boy, is are you bringing the company into disrepute? It needn't be anything like as serious as you're suggesting, Rebecca. I mean, you know, a fight in a pub, you know,
an
behaviour online.
An ill-advised tweet.
An ill-advised tweet you could be fired, especially If you are the person that brings the nation the Queen's funeral, the King's coronation, coverage of elections, you would have thought you've got to be on absolutely immaculate behaviour. And it seems to me that back in November, oh, well, he's been arrested, but we don't know whether he's guilty yet. The test for remaining in employment is not have you been convicted of a criminal offence.
Yeah.
It's have you brought your company into disrepute. And I am utterly bamboozled why Huw Edwards was paid £48,000 worth of licence fee payers' money last year.
£480,000. And that included a 40k pay rise. By the way, you would expect it to have been in his contract about disrepute, wouldn't you think?
I mean,
that would be standard media contract.
I'm absolutely bamboozled.
I think when you're at his level, you don't have a standard media contract. You can probably have a contract of his own making, and perhaps we need to talk about stars being too big. But I do think it's complicated for a channel that's very anti-cancel culture to be saying that reputational damage should constitute a reason to be dismissed is usually the opposite of what our culture here is. Yep. So it is a very complicated line to tread to get it right.
Yeah, perhaps GB News guilty of double standards there. Here's the question, Adam. Where does the BBC go from here?
I don't know, because most people I speak to have a lack of trust in their reporting, in their coverage of many things, from COVID to the Gaza-Israel conflict. I think it is on a downward spiral, and I don't think many people are too happy about having to pay for the BBC licence fee anymore. I think we will see within the next 5 years, hopefully, that comes to an end.
I think you have to make a difference between the way the BBC reports things and the way the BBC manages things internally, because editorial is different from managerial, and they're two different teams.
On both accounts.
There's an argument to be made for that, but I think how they reported on Huw Edwards has been legal and clear, and particularly since today, completely it's the lead story. They're not trying to run away from it.
The nightmare for the nation's broadcaster is too often they are the story. Not reporting the story. Too often, yet another blow-up at the BBC is the story.
By the way, it might sound trivial, but they've also got a crisis on Strictly, which is their biggest entertainment
and the other day they had to say the BBC was unavailable to give a comment to the BBC on one of their own articles, which was
ludicrous. Let's also remember they've got a misinformation unit that
BBC Verify
that does not try and investigate the BBC when there's misinformation that comes out on the BBC. I think they're highly untrustworthy.
They've really got to grasp the nettle of serious reform.
You do wonder. I mean, there was the anger about why the BBC didn't refer to Hamas as a terror group, given they're recognised as such by the EU
and they do now, but didn't previously.
Yeah, but I think they still say designated as a identified terror group rather than just terror group.
And they also reported Hamas's statements as truth, and were reprimanded for that, I believe.
Well, what do you think, Rebecca? Can the BBC move on from this, and if so, how?
I think so, but I think they need to move away from having... I think any company that has, like, a small number of people at the top who are sacrosanct and untouchable...
Too powerful?
People watching probably work in companies where they have a microcosm of the same thing.
Yeah.
There's somebody who's a golden boy or golden girl of the company who's untouchable.
We have it here
and that is bad manageable.
Untouchable.
I thought it was me.
They need to get rid of Lineker as well.
Well, the other thing I would say for the public broadcaster, they shouldn't really have golden boys as much. You would think this is where you bleed in talent, and someone who makes it on the BBC then goes over to the commercial sector.
But it also should be regional.
Gary Lineker should have cut his teeth at the BBC and then gone off to a football channel.
Rebecca?
It should be regional. You should be able to get into work at the BBC if you're a local person who doesn't have a university degree, and it should be much more decentralised and much more community. At the moment, the BBC is it still feels like an ivory tower that people can't get into with some celebrities at the top, and that is a problem.
Is there any way that the BBC can legislate against somebody like Huw Edwards? You know, they don't have access.
Well, there are already laws against the things that Huw Edwards did.
Yeah, but I mean, does an employer have any way of knowing that this is the person they employ?
But you don't have any way of knowing that. You do have the ability to act fast when it happens, and they failed to do that again.
Yeah. And also, if you're
when they get something wrong, it seems to take forever and a day to correct it. That's a problem with the big sprawling BBC.
And I think if you're earning that much money, you should be able to have saved on the basis that if you lose your job like that, you can still keep your costs running. That is obviously different. If you're making £25,000 a year, you can't preempt being dismissed without pay. But someone like Huw Edwards' level should be ready for that.
Yeah. Very briefly, Adam, is it really the fault of the BBC if one of their employees breaks the law, which is what Huw Edwards has done?
No, it's not, but it's how they react. And we've had several over the years of similar crimes, which, is not a good look. But I'll go back to this one thing. Most people I speak to do not trust the BBC anymore.
OK. Well, look, folks, let me tell you that the BBC would argue they have millions of listeners and viewers every week who are happy with the product being served up. But a BBC spokesperson has said it was made aware in confidence that Edwards had been arrested on suspicion of serious offences and released on bail whilst the police continued their investigation. At the time, no charges had been brought against Mr Edwards, and the BBC had also been made aware of significant risks to his health. In the end, at the point of charge, he was no longer an employee of the BBC. Now, chart-topping superstar Sam Smith will, slightly bizarrely, have a painting of himself hung in the National Portrait Gallery alongside portraits of the royal family, but not everyone is happy about it. The scantily clad piece shows Sam Smith as an angel with a harp and has never been publicly displayed before. The singer said it was a dream come true to appear in the nation's foremost collection of portraiture, which includes major figures from Henry VIII to Sir Winston Churchill. Is this a good look for the National Portrait Gallery? I'm not so sure. Now, coming up, should the Kurdish migrant who tried to kill a man by pushing him in front of a tube train be immediately deported? Or do we spend money accommodating this individual in a prison? We'll get stuck into that, plus find out why an RAF squadron has had to change its nickname to stop offending Muslim people. After all of that, I'll show you more of tomorrow's front pages. Lots to get through. See you in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Apparently, almost 70% of 18 to 25-year-olds, we don't know whether that's men or women, but they say that women shouldn't breastfeed in public. 19% would even go as far as labelling it disgusting.
Well, only a quarter of Brits say that women shouldn't have to cover up when they're breastfeeding. So clearly there is a big debate here and one to get to the bottom of. And to do so, we're joined by parenting journalist Annette Kellu. Really good to see you this morning, Annette.
Really good to see you.
Why is this stigma still existing in our society?
I think we've got a case here going on of double standards. I don't know about you, but I live near a park, OK? One little hint of sun, the men get completely naked. Honestly, you've never seen anything like it. The bodies are out, all different shapes and sizes. So why is it not OK for a woman to feed her baby? You know, we've got this whole thing. They're OK to be naked doing what they want. Why can't a woman just feed her baby? Why is it shameful in 2024? And it's interesting what you say about the 18 to 25-year-olds, because I really want to know, are they men or women? Because I feel like they'd be men.
I was going to say, have you got a hunch? Have you got a suspicion?
Yes, I have. And I think as well, they're thinking of them as sexy time, you know? And I feel like they're not... Well, maybe that's because they're bombarded with images and they see things like that they're seeing it in that context. But it's really not. It's feeding the baby. It's simple. Shouldn't be shameful.
But do you think for men it's like they can't see the difference? There's so much porn in society, isn't there, that the breasts are sexualised and seen as this sexual object and not actually for their main primary purpose, which is actually feeding a child.
Immediate association.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they can't.
And you can't see that they could have two functions.
Absolutely. And to them as well, I feel like they see it, and on the other side of it, they think like, ooh, mummy, and that brings up weird feelings for them, maybe.
GB News, the People's Channel.
OK, tomorrow's at front pages. Let's have a look at the Telegraph, and they lead with BBC paid Edwards £200,000 after his arrest. Tory councils bear the brunt of Labour's house-building targets, and don't punish patients by bringing the NHS to a halt. Wes Streeting warns GPs. Who knew about Huw, asks the Daily Mail. BBC bosses facing damning questions over £475,000 a year star, who has now admitted having vile child abuse images. Southport stabbing horror. Russia linked to fake news that sparked mosque riots. And Daily Express. I'm guilty. Disgraced Huw Edwards faces jail over child abuse pictures. OK, reacting to the big stories of the day. Mark Littlewood, Adam Brooks and Rebecca Reed. Now, to the shocking moment, a Kurdish migrant tried to kill a stranger by pushing him onto the tracks at a London Underground station. Bra Shorish shoved 61-year-old stranger Tadej Ust-Potucek at Oxford Circus in central London on February the 3rd. Although the 24-year-old homeless migrant denied trying to kill him, Shorsh admitted he did it for revenge. thinking the postman gave him a dirty look. The postman narrowly missed touching the live rail on the southbound Victoria line, and he was helped back up to the platform by a kind passenger. But the driver of an oncoming train told Inner London Crown Court if he'd been on the track a few seconds later, he would have been killed. Shorsh was found guilty of attempted murder and will be sentenced on September the 26th. But, Mark Littlewood, should this man be deported immediately?
Well, I think that should be the default in these cases. We sometimes have a rather quaint view that prison is about rehabilitation. Sometimes it achieves that, but rarely. Prison is really about keeping the streets of Britain safe. We've heard earlier in the programme how difficult that appears to be at the moment. So, in my view, if you're not a British citizen, if you are here under licence, if you like, then the commission of anything approaching a serious crime should be, once you're convicted, you're out.
OK, well, I think we can agree on that. Moving on, an RAF squadron is dropping its nickname because it could be offensive to Muslims. The Lincolnshire-based 14 Squadron, formed in 1915, was nicknamed the Crusaders after flying missions in the Middle East. The RAF said the decision to scrap the unofficial nickname followed a confidential service complaint, which was partially upheld. A spokesman said, "Our focus must be on not giving prominence to any offensive term that goes against the values of the Royal Air Force. The traditions and informal nicknames used by the RAF in the earliest days of the service have a place in our history. However, some are no longer appropriate in the 21st century." Adam Brooks, do you agree?
I think that is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Over 100 years' worth of British heritage. You know, wiped out, really, in modern times because it might offend 5% of the population. This is Britain. We do not change for anyone. Why are we so weak? And why are we having to do this now? I think that is an insult for people of that squadron, past and present.
I mean, Rebecca, our endeavours in the Second World War and the First World War should only be celebrated, shouldn't they, given the fact that on both occasions we defeated fascism?
Yes, absolutely, but this is a plane that goes to the Middle East, and the Crusades were about cleansing Islam and trying to convert people to Christianity. So it's not a great look, and it's a nickname. If it were the official name, maybe we would understand the hand-wringing, but it was a nickname, and I imagine people will continue to use that nickname in private, just not in official communications. OK, fascinating stuff. Actually, Spurs fans have had the same debate about some of the terminology that fans use about themselves, which are offensive to Jewish people, but then the fans think it's not offensive.
I'm a Tottenham supporter. I'm a season ticket holder.
You know the word. It begins with Y.
Yeah, and that chant is in protection of our Jewish fans, and that is celebrating our Jewish fans.
Okay.
So
there you go. Well, there you go. Fascinating. It's an interesting debate, that, isn't it? Let's crack on, though, because we've got today's Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. And so, Mark, who is your Greatest Britain today, apart from Adam Brooks?
The Sun newspaper. I was thinking about giving it to you for your brilliant monologue from the summer last year about Huw Edwards.
That's very nice of you.
But I thought that would be a bit too creepy to
No, I'll take it,
So I'm actually going to go for the Sun, if you don't mind, Mark, for their coverage in breaking and sticking to the Huw Edwards story. Top journalism.
Definitely. Well, of course, I benefited from the Sun's work because that's how I developed my approach to it on this channel. Adam Brooks, your Greatest Britain.
My nomination is the tearful Team GB rower, Lola Anderson, who won gold today and dedicated it to her dad. And there was a story about a diary entry. It's quite emotional.
It's wonderful.
You know, I thought that was lovely.
It's a great nomination. I love it. Both strong nominations. Rebecca, who's your Greatest Britain?
Mine is the Art Fund, who are having designated hours in all of the galleries around the country so that children can be encouraged to attend more art galleries and more museums. Very exciting to have more kids able to access art.
Well, my winner is the Art Fund because I think it's a fantastic thing to encourage kids to get out there and have a look at our great history, the museums, the art galleries, all the rest of it, and get them a relationship with creativity. Plus, it gives mum and dad a bit of a break and they can run around and shout at Picasso paintings. OK, how about, Mark, your Union Jackass of the day?
I'm going to nominate for the Union Jackass the Elizabeth line on the Underground here in London, supposedly the cutting edge of public transport, just been nominated for a top architecture prize on how beautiful it looks. Fine, but it has been plagued with problems, delays, closures and all of the rest of it. A perfect indication of the success of style over substance. I want Britain to have a bit more substance and a bit less style. detail.
In a couple of seconds, would you bring back HS2?
No, good Lord, no, total waste of
money. Do you think Labour are going to?
I mean, if they tell us that the black hole is as big as they say it is, they haven't got any money to do anything.
OK, Adam, your union jackass.
My nomination is a story that's made me very angry, very upset today, and that is Huw Edwards. Who pleaded guilty to 41 indecent images of young children, one of which was as young as 7 years old.
Absolutely horrific. And Rebecca, your union jackass of the day.
Mine is the Southport rioters who drew a line that didn't exist between Islam and a horrific murder of 3 children and ignored the bereaved parent when they asked them to stop.
And it's terrible that so many police officers were injured. That's counterproductive and devastating, really.
Yeah, don't throw bricks at people, even if they are police.
There you go. Well, look, I'm going to be deliberating on this, but I think I'm going to have to give it to Huw Edwards. Of course I am, because this man has committed the most awful crime, absolutely devastating. The victims involved in those images will never repair the damage. And let me tell you, the BBC has got a major headache as it seeks to navigate forward through this scandal. Just a quick note on Huw Edwards, if I can briefly, Mark. I mean, this is actually quite difficult for the nation culturally, isn't it? We've been watching this man for years, trusted him, had a relationship with him. So for my viewers and listeners, this is quite traumatic, really, to find out what he's done.
Yes, it is, and especially newscasters are typically treated, and especially if they've been around for years, as absolute honest brokers, especially over events that either traumatise the nation or bring it together, a funeral, a coronation, a general election. And the BBC's archive of that vital historical material is now in tatters.
Yes, it is. They can't have clips of the Queen's funeral or anything, Rebecca, but that is true. We have a relationship with newsreaders over decades.
We
think
do.
of Sir Trevor MacDonald and the like.
And I think when there was scandal around Philip Schofield, they were of a very different nature. People felt similarly. Somebody who is in your home a lot when you're off sick or getting big news or when you want to find out information, that is the person you have a relationship with, and they do owe you better.
Well, let me tell you, it's been a feisty 2 hours, but I'm deeply grateful to my brilliant pundits, Rebecca, Adam and Mark. Thanks to the team as well. I'm back tomorrow at 9. Headliners is next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Increasingly humid overnight with a threat of thunderstorms, but it will remain largely dry across northern areas. Plenty of sunshine to come this evening and through tomorrow here. High pressure still dominating, but it is drifting away to the east, and low pressure will arrive from the south as well as from the west throughout the rest of this week. Now, across the southeast this evening, there's a risk of some heavy downpours, but overnight that risk becomes more widespread, pushing into parts of Wales, northern and central areas of England, as well as sticking around in the southeast as well. And it's going to be a humid night for many areas. Drier and slightly fresher across eastern areas of Scotland, however. Now into tomorrow morning, there's a chance of some very heavy downpours. There's a warning in force for much of Thursday for a large proportion of England and Wales. That could affect anywhere east of Wales, really, across much of England. And that risk brings a potential for some travel disruption, heavy downpours, frequent lightning, and potentially some quite large hail as well. So do keep up to date with the forecast throughout the day on Thursday. Across parts of Scotland, though, particularly eastern Scotland, it should be a dry start, but sunshine will be fairly limited. Should be a bright start across western areas of England and Wales, though, and plenty of sunshine to come across western areas. But once the sun does break out across central and eastern areas of England, there's a further risk of some heavy downpours. Further travel disruption is expected through Thursday. Not everywhere will see these thunderstorms, but where you do see them, they could bring some fairly major impacts. It's going to be another humid day, temperatures in the mid to high 20s once again. On Friday, it looks fairly dry to start the day. There's a risk of some further downpours across eastern areas into the afternoon, but looking further west, there is a
You really could become the next big Great British Giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
On the day that I got the money in the bank account, everything just seemed a lot sunnier.
But I do have something to spend it on.
Just go for it. It's an absolute must.
Thank you, GB News.
amazing feeling to win.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
The sunny spell that many have experienced this week makes this the perfect time to seek inspiration for fresh, beautiful food to fit the weather. Hannah Harley-Young from Crazy Sexy Food joins me once again for the latest in our Taste of Britain series. And to go alongside the return of the glorious sunshine, she recommends tequila.
To be honest with you, it's more about my total love of tequila. It is my favourite drink. I have my favourite cocktail ready to be shaked for you in a second, which is obviously the margarita. But I think also I just love this sort of general story of tequila. Tequila, a bit like with champagne, can only be produced in the region of Tequila in Mexico. But I've actually brought for you, interestingly, a brand that is London-based. This was set up by Tom and Jack. They were drinking, I think, in sort of 2018, 2019.